So, welcome everyone to today's Social System Mapping SenseMaking session for February 7th, 2022. I'm really excited to see some brand new faces and some faces I haven't seen for a very long time, as well as some of our really regular faces. So this is fun and exciting. Your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, co-founder of SumMap and Greater Than the Sum, and founder of the social system mapping methodology, part of the tool set, and just sort of the approach, the mapping approach. Your other host today is Kara Martner, my partner in, I don't know if it's crime, but my partner in many things. And today she's our producer for this on-ramp set, or this social system mapping session. So for those of you who are brand new to this setting, I want to first help you get grounded in what this is, so that you can decide if this is where you want to be this morning or not. So first, this is about a vision and about a possibility. So there's this thing I've already referred to called social system mapping, which we talk about pretty much all the time in this community of practice. And we believe that this kind of mapping can help communities and change networks become self-organizing more quickly and wisely, and can catalyze greater potential in all kinds of collective transformation initiatives. So at the highest level, this is about leaning into that possibility and turning our vision into a reality. It's also an opportunity to learn about this kind of mapping, as well as to get familiar with, especially in these sense-making sessions, to get familiar with and literate in the body of theory that supports our belief in the potential, that informs our mapping practice, and that is an essential ingredient of our map sense-making process. It's also an opportunity for you to contribute your own experience and expertise to this emerging field, because it's not just about the theory, even though theory is big, it's also about lived experience and insight into the dynamics of people working together. And I know that if you're with us today, you've already got a lot of experience and thoughts about those things. So we would love to be absorbing that from you as well. So it's a community of practice and field building with an intent for all of us, both through our mapping practices and how we show up and how we interact, to become carriers of a culture of generative transformation. I'm wondering if I have co-hosts on. Are you guys hearing whenever anybody comes into the hearing, the binging that's coming from I'm not seeing anybody nodding. So, okay, I'll proceed. So social system mapping is foundational to this community, but not all of us are mappers. Some of us are here to learn mapping. Others are here to inform the practice. Others out of curiosity about what's possible. And others are here just because of the community itself, because we have a lot in common, and we love each other, and we want to be part of something that's kind of interesting. So if you'd like to continue to come back and join us for whatever reason, we would love you to do that. And then lastly, it's also about a relationship to the particular social system map that represents and is sort of a scaffolding for our own community. Because so we have our own social system map, which I'll give you a brief look at in a few minutes, and which we invite you to be on, especially if you want to stay aware of what we're doing and to get more involved. So that's what this is. This is one small session in this much larger context. And if, having heard all of that, you feel like you're in the wrong place, and you aren't interested in any of what I just said, no hard feelings, feel free to jump off right now and do something better with your time, and you'll be welcome back whenever you want to come back, if you ever do. So if you do want to stick around with us, today's objectives are that you come away with a sense of the potential we're inspired by. This is a big thing. There's a lot of moving parts. It's kind of complex and confusing. So don't expect yourself to come away getting it all. That's not likely. But if you come away with a sense of potential, I think that would be great. You'll hopefully meet some cool folks and feel welcomed by them. You'll get at least a little bit curious about human systems dynamics and social system mapping, and how those two methodologies can work together. and you'll have been introduced explicitly to the CDE model of human systems dynamics, and you'll have applied it in your own context. So for our agenda today, we're going to do introductions and get a little bit of background on your experience with both of these methodologies. I'll introduce you briefly to social system mapping. We'll do some breakouts to get to meet each other. We'll come back, do a little bit of HSD theory. We'll break out again, same group, longer breakouts. Then we'll do some report back and review and community announcements. So that's our agenda. And we're going to jump in with getting to know a little bit about you. Kara, are you putting the Mentimeter link? So, sorry, someone's not hearing something. Oh, okay, thanks, Ben. So Kara, I think Kara should be putting the link to the, did Kara disappear? She needed to get, okay. Go ahead and put the link.
Kara's been setting up the breakout room, so I was.
Okay, well, if you go ahead and put the link to the Menti, great. So there's a link to the presentation platform that I'm using. It's kind of like presentation / survey platform called Mentimeter. If you click on that link, you should end up with a tab that enables you to input information. So are people seeing that? Are they, okay. I see Ben seeing it, Brian seeing it. Okay, so if you could go ahead and if you're in that space, and just keep in mind that sometimes you'll need to be toggling between your input frame or browser tab, and the dashboard where I'm sharing my screen so you can see the presentation. But let's go ahead and have you put into the Mentimeter your name, pronouns, location, networks that you're supporting in some way. All together in one comment field. So, and we should, on my screen, then as people are putting those in, you'll be able to see them. And I know you've started doing that into the chat, but it's great to also have it in the Mentimeter so we can all look at them all together. And I'm not seeing any come in, so I'm wondering if I have a, there we have, Rachel did. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, Washington, D.C. Right. Quina, do I have that right?
Almost like quinoa.
I have people in my life who say that 2 different ways. Quinoa. I got both of the quinoas in my head. Quina, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Thank you, Quina. Hopefully I've got it. Okay, and then once you're done with that, you could move to the next. I think I need to move you to the next slide. I'm going to see what more comes in here, but the next question is, Pamela, you only see a question field. Yeah, I think there's just a text field and you can just put all this, your name, all those things into the one question field. The next question I'm going to ask you you can start thinking about it is, what's one of the bigger sort of feeling insurmountable challenges that you've experienced in working with networks? Something that you would really love to begin to unpack how to work with. And I'm going to move to the next screen. Great. Yeah, coordinating schedules. Given busy lives, that's a big one. Sure. Yeah, those are who leads and where does accountability sets. It's a big one. Who has the authority or power to be, yep. These are all things shared shared challenges, I think. Okay, you guys can keep putting all of this in. All of this will be available later also in our follow-up email so that you can see what people entered. I'm going to move forward just because I've got a lot on our agenda today. And want you to just sort of keep those in mind as we move through today. So I want to just find out from everyone how familiar you are with social system mapping. So you should be in a frame right now that just gives you a little scale to say how familiar you are with social system mapping. If you go ahead and do that, we're split on rough idea and fairly experienced, about 50-50, no, more, getting more to rough idea. Okay. Kara, how many people are we today? Have you counted?
I was just counting. We've got 16 and now 17.
Okay.
So we're just hitting that edge of a 5-person breakout room.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a person or two who's like, I don't even know what this is. So that's great to know, because everyone who does know what this is, please be sensitive to those people who don't and help them wrap their heads around it. That's what we're here for. And Pamela is confused. And Kara, can you like pull off into a separate breakout room with her and see if you can help her figure it out, maybe?
I can attempt to do that. I'm not sure I can put myself in a breakout room. But
I don't think that's necessary, Christine, but thank
Okay.
you for the consideration.
Okay.
I remember before I didn't have trouble, but for some reason now I'm just not seeing what you're showing, but I'm just going to go along with what you're doing here.
Okay. And I was going to say, if you have technical difficulties, and my head just blocked this, if you have technical difficulties, just feel free to put your answers in the chat. It's not about making you, beating you up with technology. So I apologize for that not popping into my head at the right time. Okay, so next question has to do with familiarity with social systems or with human systems dynamics. So this question has to do with if you're like have a concept of what that means, if you have a rough idea, totally not sure, introduced to some of the models and methods, or if you've been through the formal HSD practitioner training. And I know there are members in our community that have, including me, but looks like maybe not here today. And so we have a handful of people who don't know what that's about. So that's great. This will be a good introduction then, hopefully. It's a partial introduction because it's a fairly complex, but simplified, hard to describe thing, but I'm gonna go ahead and move forward. So just for starters, what is a social system map? Well, a social system map, I like to say, is a mashup of a bunch of different kinds of maps. So it includes elements of a causal loop, cause and effect system map, things like stakeholder maps, asset maps, concept maps, social network maps. So it has components of all of these maps, which is why I call it a mashup. But although there's a whole lot of visual similarities between all these maps and there's content similarities, what's different and unique about a social system map is that it includes dimensions, not a lot of dimensions, from all of these kinds of maps and more, so that it's more layered, it's more dense, and it's more complex than any of these kinds of maps, than any of them are on their own. It's also more of a process than a product. It's online, interactive, accessible to all network members, iterative, emergent, dynamic, in that it's not a one-time snapshot, but that it can evolve over time. And I can't remember, I think I'm gonna come and show you our map after I get through this next bit. So that's what it is, but what's the point? Well, social system mapping is essentially, it's about systemic transformation. So it's about supporting a global movement, working to shift from systems of dominance, exploitation, and extraction to systems of connection and reverence and regeneration. So it presents as fairly techy, but the intention and the potential that we sense in this is fairly deep. And so that's what we're trying to together to get to manifesting that deeper potential. And we recognize that the foundational structure for this global scale systemic shift that we're trying to bring about or support bringing about is strong networks of wise change agents. And I know all of you are part of this shift because you wouldn't have come across us or be here if you weren't. And networks are the most ubiquitous structure in the world. So you would think that it would come naturally for us to enact change through collaborative networks. But what we've learned in the past couple decades about this work and what was, so we got a hint of in your challenges input is that social networks, social change networks are really challenging. And many of us believe that the root causes of what makes large scale systemic change or transformation so hard, and therefore the reason that collaborative networks can be so challenging is due to essentially two fundamental worldviews that are just ground into our modern and especially our Western culture. And so these worldviews are so deep, and I'm sure you all, are familiar with what I'm going to bring up, but or have given thought to it. These two worldviews are the separate self worldview, which is, I'm sure you're familiar with, the whole old dog eat dog paradigm that humans are just, it's just the way it is, survival of the fittest. There's nothing we can do about it. We just have to learn how to take care of ourselves and let everyone fend for themselves. The separate self worldview is also sees humans as separate from the planet, separate from all the living beings on the planet, doesn't really have a sense of how our own behaviors impact everything else and then how they come back and impact us in the long run. So that's the one deep paradigm we're trying to shift with social system mapping. And the other one is just this linear mechanistic understanding of how change happens, as if large scale complex adaptive systems were actually machines and you could just sort of push the go button and everything would fall into place. And if you could just get everybody to know what the right go button is and hit, get everybody to agree to we could push that, then everything would fall into place. And actually what we're trying to do is we're trying to deal with complex adaptive systems, and it doesn't work that way in those kinds of systems. And so learning how to quit beating our heads against the wall with this mechanistic understanding and learning how to actually work with the complex adaptive system is the other paradigm that social system mapping is trying to deal with. So at the highest level, our theory of change is that when well done and when it's really used, a social system map can help us address both of those challenges. So one of the ways that in terms of the separate self, with a social system map, just the fact of being able to see a network structure, to be able to see the relationships and how they fit in the context of other systemic elements, such as power, resources, et cetera, helps us. Like, we haven't historically had a way of seeing relationships, of seeing the structures of relationships. And just that the visual dimension is another pathway into the brain. And so just that much can really help with that separate self worldview, as well as give us, a lot of ways. A map can give us a lot of ways of actually building more mutually supportive and strategic relationships. The other way, so I guess partly what I'm trying to get at here is there's like two layers of change that we need to be working on simultaneously. One is the relational layer, the realization of the spiritual and emotional connection that we have to one another and to the planet. And the other one is at this sort of cognitive layer, this thinking layer. So that having a social system map can help us have a deeper understanding of change in complex adaptive systems. So it becomes a tool for learning about complexity. And we're going to try a little teeny bit of that in a few minutes in a way that can inform wiser action within our change networks, and that can help everyone in the network have a better sense of how to handle volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous circumstances. So it brings the level of cognition into that land of complexity in a way that is still relevant and applicable to one's own context. So what a social system map is not is a quick fix. It's not a standalone solution. It's not a replacement for live relational engagement. It's not a product as opposed to a process. It's not immediately clear how to get the most from it. As Jim Best recently said to me, how do you put it? A social system map does not guide you in making sense, not in and of itself guide you in making sense from a social system map, which is why we have these sessions. It's also not a social media or curation or communication platform such as Twitter or Facebook or Mighty Networks. Sometimes people think they're going to get that from it, and that's not what it is. So I'm going to quickly share a really quick walk through just a glimpse at our social system map. So this is the map of this community. And Kara, I'm going to ask you to put the embed link to this map so that everyone can open it if they want to. And I'd like to see if, just for the fun of it, there could be at least one person in every breakout room that opens the map, and just sort of, if you're in a breakout room, we'll get to this in a minute, but just look each other up on the map and see if you can just see some commonalities or something. Just play with it a little bit. Anyway, so this is one view. A social system map often has multiple views of how we look at the information. If you've never seen one of these, if you click on this visualization is in a platform called Kumu. If you click on a person, a node here, you'll see information about that person. This information comes from the tool that my spouse and I built called SumApp. So that's the data gathering tool for a social system map. And then you can see information about these people. So this is a directory view. There's various ways you can filter on information in most of our views. This is what we call an offers and asks view, where these are skill sets that are relevant in our community. And we can see who can offer help with that skill set and who's asking for help with that skill set can see that by the kind of line that is connecting them. And this looks like, that didn't look like nobody knows how to do that, but I'm not buying that. I think it's a filter problem. This is the involvement view, where we can see people's relationships to one another. If we want to filter down the kinds of relationships, we can see who's collaborating with who. We can even see information about so if we click on the actual line, we can see this is Dante and me, and we have collaborated on projects and we check in periodically. So you can see about the relationships here. And then this is another view. All of these views are custom made. All of these views are made out of the data that we gather in SumApp, and built around what is it we think we need to see? Like how should we represent this data in ways that help our community members understand our system better? This last view is just a time tag view, where this is what our network looked like before May of 2021, and this is what it looks like now. So you can see it's growing. You can see there are more people in this map and more connections. And then you can just really sort of dig into the data in various ways. So that is my quick peek at our map. And what I'm going to do now is we'll have you go into breakout groups for 5 minutes. Just like you to introduce yourselves again in person and share your just your level of experience with social system mapping and human systems dynamics, so everybody can understand who to focus on. And the focus is on the newbies, the people who need more information. And so we'll sort of prioritize their questions and comments. And then if you have an extra moment or two, play with the map for a minute. So, okay, let's go ahead, Kara. It's too short. That's part of the dynamic. Okay, and I'm going to start sharing my screen again. If I can find the thing again. I always lose it. Okay, So people often sort of think when I'm talking about mapping that I'm talking about mapping to the at the exclusion of relational work and principles and all of the philosophical important agreements, et cetera. And it's not that. So, but for today, we're looking at this from the systems thinking theory. So from a cognitive level, which is not to say that's more important than the relational level at all. I just want to make that clear. But a social system map can help when there is so many massively entangled dynamics that it's hard to even see everything and wrap your head around what's going on. And HSD can help with that. So we can and do use all kinds of theories and frameworks to inform our mapping and sense making. But for these introductory sense making sessions that take place on the first Monday of every month, we mostly focus on using the models and methods developed by Glenda Ouyang, who's the founder of the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. And Kara is going to put a link to that, the website for the Institute, in the chat so that you can go dig in further if you're interested. But so Glenda has been developing this body of work for over 20 years, actually more like 30, through lots of collaboration with her 3 sisters, all of whom were teachers, and so were their parents. So teaching is really at the heart of this work, much more so than abstract theory or just applying it with high-level clients. And so that's really different from most other approaches to systems thinking, which are often more theoretical and less about teaching an application. So I've personally been studying this stuff for over 20 years myself and have found HSD to be the most accessible, applicable, flexible, and down-to-earth sensible approach to systems thinking that I've ever come across. And so for our purposes of learning how to unearth and share the value of our social system maps, it gives us a lot to work with. So applying it isn't hard to do. It's just a matter of practice and a shift in thinking. But that's why we're focusing on HSD in these sessions, even though other systems thinking approaches can also be very relevant. So what we're going to look at today is the CDE model. This is a very sort of fundamental understanding that comes out of complexity and systems thinking in lots of contexts, but this is Glenda's representation of it. This represents the 3 fundamental dimensions or conditions that inform and drive change in complex adaptive systems. So once you can start to think in terms of the container differences and exchanges, the CDE model, you can start to begin to find ways into those really complex problems that we're all trying to deal with. So what does this mean? Back up. So just, this is a picture of it, but so obviously there's containers, and I'll spell that out in a minute. There's differences, and then there's interactions between or exchanges among those differences within that container. So, and there's often nested containers. So there'll be containers within containers. And our first thing is to say, okay, what's our biggest container? So for us, it would be this community of practice, and then think about the containers within it. So what is a container? It's any bounding or attracting condition. So it might be the Bible. It might be an individual. It might be groups. It might be values or perspectives. So for instance, if we're in a school system, you've got teachers have one perspective, students have another perspective, parents have another perspective. Each of those have a sort of a distinction between what's in and what's out of them, or something that's holding them together. Goals can be container for many of us. Goals are very strong containers, physical locations, etc. So I would like to, I'm going to go to the next slide and have you, I'm going to have you start with, just get a piece of paper or something that you like to take notes on. We're going to make 3 simple lists. And if you don't want to do this, don't feel like you have to, but and the first list is to just, so first I'm going to ask you to pick a specific community or network that you're working with as your example. So you're going to apply these concepts to a specific one. And then just start, your first list will be, what are the containers that attract or bind, make a boundary condition for your network? I'm not going to give you a ton of time for this because I'm going to have you come back together in a minute and share yours with each other. And so this is just to get prime the pump, but just start that list on containers. And I'm going to move to differences. So what is a difference? Well, a difference is a distinction across different parts of the system. A thing to keep in mind is that whether something is a difference or a container depends on the scale you're looking at. So within a school system, the students, teachers, and parents are differences, but they're also containers within a larger container. So there is no right and wrong to this. This is, how are you looking at it at the moment and what's useful for you in thinking about your current situation? So some people might say that's a difference. Some people might say that's a container. Just depends on how you're looking at it. But the important thing to understand about differences is that where there's a difference is where there's going to be tension. There's going to be different perspectives, different goals, different needs, et cetera. And in those tensions in a complex adaptive system is where the change is going to happen eventually. So it could be that tension creates collapse, or it could be that tension is attended to and worked with and generates new possibilities. So tensions are very, very important, not things to be brushed under the rugs, but things to be surfaced and thought about and attended to. Examples of tensions are different interests, like amounts of assets or different kinds of assets that are held. Experience in networks can be a tension. There's brand new people, and then there's people who've been at this kind of work for 20 years. Different cultures, different learning styles, different roles, different formal and informal power. All of those are differences in a system or within a container. And I'm going to have you go ahead and spend a moment just quickly listing some of the differences in your context that you're using for your example. Yes, Jonathan, I'm all about the tensions. Anybody who knows me will say, yes, Christine's always all about the tensions. They're just challenging and difficult for everybody involved. But yeah, that's because they're important. Okay, I'm going to move to the exchanges. So an exchange is any kind of flow or transfer of resources, energy, information. These can be funding, friendship, swapping skills, trust, love, bartering, collaborations, relationship, language, connection. There's all kinds of flows. And so the CDE model is meant to help us wrap our heads around what are the containers, what are the differences, and what are the flows. And once we've done that, we can start to see, do we have enough exchanges across these differences? Do we need fewer exchanges across these differences? Is the container too small? Is the container too big, et cetera? So we can start to figure out what's the right fit for function, for what our goals are. There's no right answer, but we can begin to look at those. Okay. So hopefully each of you has at least an item or two on your list for containers, differences, and exchanges. And I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and I'm going to put you in breakouts again. I'm going to ask you to just, oh no, first I want to do another thing. I'm going to ask you to share those with each other and talk about them. But first, I know I'm really trying to stick to my timelines and my agenda. And so I'm cramming a lot in. And I also, when that's happening, I start to talk really fast. And so I acknowledge that that's not healthy, but I'm doing it. I'm trying not to, but it happens. And so I just want to see if you guys can input, not only related to my talking too fast potentially, but just how much information is being shared, where you're at with your cognitive load right now. So are you overwhelmed? Are you bored? Are you kind of intrigued? Yes, Pamela, this is being recorded and shared, but not the breakouts, just the main session part. So I'm not seeing a lot of people responding in the, so this is in Mentimeter. There's a poll Okay.
You scroll through all the slides just to get to it.
Oh. Mentimeter is better than other things, but it's still not perfect. There's no perfect anything, but okay. So I'm seeing that we have we have some overwhelm a little bit, and we have some confusion. And so I know that in our breakout groups, we have, Kara has set it up so that there's in every breakout group, there's at least one person who has been through this a few times and should be, and is pretty familiar with social system mapping. And so part of their role in this breakout is to help you who are confused get a little more clarity or a little more okay with what's going on. So again, check in with who's overwhelmed and who's confused, and everybody else just sort of focus on helping them find their way, please. Okay, and actually, we're right on time, oddly enough. Pamela, I see you need to leave at the top of the hour. That's fine. We'll hopefully get to say goodbye to you before you go, but if not, have a wonderful day. And Kara, you could go ahead and put people into the breakouts. Welcome back. I hope this was more time was better, even though I anticipated still probably wasn't enough. And I hope that those of you who are feeling a little overwhelmed or confused at least got a little bit more clarity. And so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to sort of do a little bit of sharing what you came up with together. So if we go back to Mentimeter briefly, what are your networks? So just love a list of what the system that you used for your example was. It can be like the US healthcare or global health. That's a huge system. That's a monster size system. Who else had a system that they were using as an example that they can put into? Thank you, Lisa Jo. If you're taking off, have a good day. Glad you could join us. Bye. Pamela also jumped off before. So I'm, okay, I see Ben, that's great. So we'll just do this a little bit together. Did anybody have systems that they were using as an example? Because I can move on if there's nobody getting ready to put anything in here. Kina, I see you smiling. No. Okay. I'm gonna go next. So as you talked about this, if you talked about this, what containers did you come up with that hold your networks together enough to generate self-replicating patterns? So what were the containers that you heard from somebody else or that you thought of yourself? I see lots of people have, it looks like there's interactions going on in DMs or something. I don't see anything going into the.
Anything that moves.
Is a
You
container?
can name it and move it. You can map it.
Okay, you want to put that in the, do you mind putting that in the Mentimeter?
Oh,
I
that's
can
gonna be complicated, but okay.
I can see we're not going there. Okay, so I'm going to bag it on the containers. Okay, human being, surgeons. I'm going to go to the next one, which is the differences in your network. Let's see if we get any responses there for a brief moment. And then sector, size, capacity for change. Yeah, those are good ones. Any others? Let me go back for a moment. Okay, we got a little bit more in the containers. Okay, differences. Prefers advocacy focus. that could be something like the strategic differences. Like sometimes in networks, there's differences in strategy of how to move forward. Maturity in the work, definitely a difference that can cause, that can create tensions. Language, experience, rural, urban is a huge difference. So yeah, so this advocacy focus versus implementation.
Hey, Christine, just a quick question. Sorry to interrupt. Are you in the past you were sharing your screen, but we don't see your screen.
Oh, okay. So differences. I'm going to move on to the exchanges. So what exchanges are happening or not happening, but you would wish they were happening in your networks, or what a social system map is good for is helping you. They may be happening, but maybe you can't see them. And a social system map would help you see them. Strategies, funding, inspiration. Anything else? Information, collaboration opportunities. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move to a last little bit of how this fits into, how this relates to social system mapping and to change in complex adaptive systems. So, and I'm just actually going to read this thing that I found from Glenda over the weekend as I was preparing that I just liked how she described it. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. HSD offers a logic that reaches beyond simple cause and effect to capture the complex interdependencies, multiple causes, and open boundaries that are so common in human systems. So Glenda calls this way of thinking and acting pattern logic. It's not very simple, according to her, and it isn't predictable at all. It never repeats, and every person may have a unique view of what's real, as well as, I would add, what's a difference, what's a container, etc. Still, according to Glenda, it is the logic that is useful when simple cause and effect are impossible. So the first one is this, these are the parts of her theory of change. This first piece is the environment, which consists of things interact, they create patterns. So things interact down here. This is the CDE. That interaction creates patterns, system-wide patterns, and then the patterns influence how the things interact in the future. So this becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop, where every cause is an effect and every effect is a cause. And these processes of emergent change happen all the time, in all places, and across all scales, from personal feelings to global markets. So we have that complex adaptive system and its patterns, which we just described, which is the first cycle. And then at the same time, according to Glenda, the conscious human being is busy creating meaning. So here, he or she inquires about the world by asking what, making meaning by asking so what, and moving to action with now what. So this is the cycle that in Glenda's universe, I know this cycle exists in lots of other models, she calls this adaptive action. And every person is doing it all the time. So this is the second cycle. So first cycle number one, cycle number two, and then the other thing she says is that people who are conscious of this cycle, who are aware that they're doing each of these stages, are much better at it than those who aren't really aware that they're doing it. Then, as a person observes emerging patterns in a complex adaptive system, he or she will take action to influence the agents in the system in hopes of shifting the pattern. And so this is the third cycle, this cycle between the system and the agents sense making in the system, or their adaptive actions cycle. And so this is the third cycle in the theory of change, and it accounts for the ability of people to influence each other and their environments. And then the final part of the theory of Glenda's theory of change includes a variety of models and methods that a person can use to improve how they see, understand, and influence. So the adaptive actor takes out a tool, uses it, improves it, and puts it back in the tool chest. Over time, individuals and groups get better and better at using tools, completing adaptive action cycles, and influencing patterns that emerge in the world. So the CDE is one of those patterns or one of those models. She's got plenty of other models and methods that help us break down this complex adaptive system into simple parts that anyone can take out and look at. And then that can inform either their individual adaptive action cycle or their collective adaptive action cycles. And then we can make more wise, take more wise action about shifting complex systems. So none of what I just said has anything to do explicitly with social system mapping. So where does that come into the picture? Well, a social system map is actually the best, most information-packed model of a network or community that we currently have access to. So it gives us, the containers, differences, and exchanges are what the map actually represents. And if we really learn how to make sense with our maps, we can actually start to see the patterns that exist within our system. We can see the patterns of the relationship structure and how things flow based on differences and containers, et cetera. So it gives us a lens into the complex adaptive system of our own networks that we can't get any other way, as well as giving us insights into the patterns that our networks are generating. And so as we're able to see these patterns more clearly, we can better understand them better and take wiser action to influence the complex adaptive systems that we've set out to do something about. So when we're dealing with change networks, we can include a social system map among the models and methods that we often plug into this adaptive action cycle. So, and as we do this, do these cycles together collectively, we will start to generate a collective shared insight into this mess or this wonderfulness, whatever it is, and into this stuff that we're trying to shift. And we'll start to create shared language for thinking about it, shared practices for working through it, and start to bring our thinking closer together and more in alignment so that we can actually work together and accomplish things. And yeah, so that's just, and the more transparent we are in this process. So in our community of practice, we're working on making this whole cycle more obvious and transparent to the community so that you can see how we're doing this ourselves as an example. Then we can all learn from that and begin to take these skills of using models and methods and being more conscious of our adaptive action cycles and apply them to the systems beyond the system where we've mapped. We can start to actually think in this way in other contexts as well, but this gives us a starting point, the social system map of the complex adaptive system of our own networks. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'm going to tell you just some of the, in the name of being both transparent about what we're up to, as well as just where you can, what more there is to offer. So what else are we doing within this community of practice? First of all, there's Monday sessions just about every Monday of the month. We have this SenseMaking session is the intro to SenseMaking is the first Monday. The second Monday, we look at somebody's map and we dig into it. So someone in the community who's made a social system map, shares their context and their hopes for the map, et cetera. We walk through their map or they walk us through their map. We ask them questions, we learn what worked, what didn't work, what are they trying to do, et cetera. That's the second Monday. The third Monday, we have some kind of what we call a deep dive. So we take some aspect of all of this work and we sort of try to unpack it and dig into it further. That one has more breakouts than usually the on-ramp or the map sharing is just presentation, all of us together. Then in the deep dive, we have more interaction. Another thing that we're doing is, so we made that social system map that you looked at. I made that. pretty much by myself about 2.5 years ago. And we've been, all of us, aware for a while that that's, wasn't necessarily the best starting point, but it's what we started where we had the, I started where I could, which is how any social system map needs to start, is where there's energy, where there's somebody can do something, that's where you begin. But built into the whole concept of social system mapping is this iterative capacity, which we are now working on what we're calling operationalizing the iterative potential of a social system map, which means, okay, we made this map, we've got people on it, but as we do sense making within the community, we start to see, this happens to me all the time, I get embarrassed. I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that when I made the map. I didn't ask that question when I made the map. Oh, we should have that on the map. But rather than me just continually taking ownership of the map and controlling how it works, we're working on building a collective capacity to sort of do that together. So one of the things that's, and I'm just going to say this for a couple of you, and then Ben, I will ask you to make your announcement, but in a moment, Jim and Mary, I'm just going to speak for you for a moment, just because I didn't prepare this properly. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so Jim has been working on trying to figure out how to diagram what this process could look like, and how to document it and make it generalizable so that it can be shared with other communities. So if you have thoughts, and at the moment it's kind of a tangle, but if you have thoughts about that, or if you want to know more, if you want to learn what he came up with, or if you're just interested in, what would that look like, contact Jim. Hope that's okay for me to say that. Mr. Best. He's shrugging. Okay. And Mary has been working on, as part of that overall process, a process for vetting potential new questions. So we're all here together. If you were just looking at our map, you might have said, oh, why didn't they ask this question? Or, oh, there's a container that they never thought of. It should be in the map. Well, if that happens to you, there are now a handful of us present who you could tell that to, and they would put it into what we call our harvest board. So I'm going to ask you to just raise your hand, the harvest board, or people who know who are prepared to do that. So Mary and Ben and me and Jim and Brian, all of us now have this little process for gathering ideas and putting them into a place. And then Mary is working on creating a process for vetting them so that they are coherent with our vision, aligned with our vision, and coherent with our principles and our agreements as they're emerging, and so that they make sense. So we're not just, jamming every question in the universe in there. We're sense making before we do that. So Mary's working on developing that process. So I would say if you have thoughts about it or interested in it, you could probably reach out to Mary, and a handful of us. Okay, so there's that, and then back to the whole concept of, the sort of the distinction that I hear people making a lot between mapping and community building or relationship building. We're focused right now on creating this process for operationalizing, updating the map and reiterating the map and keeping it alive and emerging through what we learn about ourselves and about mapping. So we're working on that, but we're also still focused on relationship building. So we have relationship building rolled into all of our sessions, at least a little bit. And Ben is going to tell us about another thing he's started doing recently, which is really cool.
There's a conversation process developed by the consultant Peter Block, known as the 6 Conversations. That's all about developing relationships and patterns for communities that want to engage in systemic transformation work. And so we're offering hour-long sessions to do one of the 6 conversations each week on Tuesdays at 11 Central, noon Eastern, where I am. And this week we're doing a 2-hour session on Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern. And there'll be another one of those for people that want to do a more intensive one on Friday the 25th as well. So if you're interested in either of those, you can just put a note in the chat right now or get on the email list for SumApp, and regular announcements are coming out from Kara about that, and also on the Slack for this community of practice. There's a channel. And we're doing mapping related to that as well. It's a sort of a sandbox for seeing how you can integrate live conversational process and using a map to see what's happening as a result of that, to harvest outcomes from that. You got it, Jonathan.
Thank you, Ben. So part of what we're doing in this community practice is still very much developing the field of social system mapping. So Ben is very, very interested in how can you, as you just said, how can you take a conversational process and apply a map to it in some way? And one of the things that I think about all the time is how we do all this wonderful work at community building or at learning, how to be together differently and how to show up and dealing with our trauma or all these various things. And they're ephemeral and they have an impact and they change us as beings, but it's really hard to see how they're, how those things are building and what the ripple effects are and how they're impacting a community. And so social system mapping adds this layer that is less ephemeral. It's not as deep and profound, but it adds something that we can start to see the structure shifting, et cetera. So that's kind of what that's about. And the other, there's a piece of this invitation, which is what else? Like what else haven't we thought of? What else could be mapped? I'm sure Michael Linton would say flows of funding. So which Ben has actually, Michael, you and Ben might talk because Ben has actually done some mapping of funding flows. But how else can we use this methodology or this field to help make visible things that are deep and invisible and systemic? So we can start to help see how we're shifting things. So that's sort of our open promise of experimenting with that kind of thing and sharing what we learn. Okay, so I just want to just to review quickly. Am I sharing my screen? I think I am. No.
No, you're not. No.
Thank you. Now I just lost my Zoom window. Hang on. Okay. Okay, so this is, so this goes back to I'm going to just not do this and I'm just going to open us up for a few minutes of Q&A and response and conversation. So I'm kind of tired of the whole Mentimeter thing. I didn't do it. Okay. Yeah, so just like, especially those of you who are new to this context, if you've got, just questions or, what's coming up for you, thoughts, concerns, let's just open it up for some verbal dialogue. And I see Michael is putting some of his work into the chat and I'm going to take a look at it. What else is in there? But prioritizing new people. If you've got, I'll just give you a moment to see what's bubbling up for you. And if nobody wants to comment, then people who are less new, feel free to, something new came up for you.
I'm Rachel Gildner from Washington, D.C. I'm not sure the exact type of thing that you want us to share, but I will just say I am a newbie to this and I'm feeling incredibly, not a total newbie, I've done some systems thinking work, but really to this methodology and the science. And something that I'm thinking about is my role is in my community to be a bit of a bridge between the people who will most benefit from the systems change that I'm working on, and the institutions for whom things really have to change in order for the systems to change, right? Like they actually hold most of the institutional power. And so just thinking about how to do this with communities in ways that don't feel threatening but that actually they feel part of the like collective success. And so I'm just thinking about the role of power, I guess, as an exchange in the systems that I'm trying to actually change. So, but this has been just really like, I hope this is just the start for me. So thank you.
Good. Yeah, that's sort of right up the alley of what we were thinking about when we started this work, is how those in power don't always see what's really, I mean, they have their ideas of what's going on and they don't necessarily want to see. But yeah, how can we shift that dynamic to make this visible? Anyone else? Anything, doesn't have to be, I don't have a specific category. You could tell them, share the weather if you really, where you are. Anyone?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I wish there was snow over here. Sounds like other parts of the country are getting my snow. Send it this way.
Yeah, you can have some of ours. Anyone else? Seeing you.
It feels like surf's up in the mapping world. There's a definite surge of interest in this sort of tooling and awareness. I'm very excited about that. Thank you. A lovely presentation, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great stuff.
I don't know, I can contribute something. I'm a scientist. I was a physicist years ago, so I would love to dive into this techie stuff and do this stuff. And at the same time, I'm a facilitator. I work with human beings, and I'm a bit like, okay, where do I concentrate right now? And I started with this map, and it was a day when I entered data, and then I was like, is it what I want to? I'm a bit stretched in between all the, I'm connected internationally. I love this kind of work. I work with complexity, but I get lost in, where to continue and where to put my effort into. So just.
Yeah, that I think is the biggest challenge of social system mapping, is just how do we make it small asks, like little bitty asks for people just to keep their information updated, and how do we make it make a process that isn't this huge new thing, but we just sort of fold it into our thinking, into what we do. And generally, in my experience, it's like, okay, there's our work, and then there's this map thing over here, which is this tag on, and doesn't really inform our work very much. And we just ask people to come over here and think about it every once in a great while, but it's not woven together. And I don't think, so that's part of our experience. And when I say we're trying to operationalize this iterative capacity, it's how do we solve that puzzle so that it is not a big thing. It's just part of how we do work together. And we all are able to take a few extra minutes a month or whatever it is to deal with the map. It's our big challenge and our big exploration right now. Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as an entry point, really, at its most basic level, what we're doing is giving people surveys of different kinds and a way to visualize that data. And so the people that do the visualizing, that work with the visualization and make meaning out of it, doesn't have to be everybody that's providing the data either. So it's a fairly low bar to say, take 3 minutes to complete this survey. And that can be done on a phone easily. And then other people can work with the visualization and then share that back to the larger community as well. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we're learning. Here's our next question. So I think that's, it can seem huge and overwhelming and complex, but if you break it down to those small steps, it isn't necessarily, a leap for anyone that's got a phone to play and to participate.
Yeah. Just another thing that's coming up for me is just that we used to focus on this more, but it's still an implicit part of this whole thing, is people have different roles in a network, and people have different roles in creating a social system map. So there's like the techie geeky people who actually make the survey and do the visualizations. And there's the visionary people who help us think about the possibility, et cetera. And there's the sense-making people who help us make sense of the map. And those are different roles within the ecosystem of social system mapping, and they think very differently. And so actually it's good practice for learning how to work on a focused thing with people who have different ways of processing and different ways of thinking and working and different preferences. And so, you know, the idea is that, you know, as we learn to work together across those kinds of differences, that actually helps us get better at doing that kind of work in different contexts. So I know we've got to go. We have a little brief goodbye ritual that I'm going to launch us into right now, which is we all unmute, and I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And when I get to 1, we just all give each other our blessings and our well wishes for the day, and then we can jump off. So thank you all for being here. Really, really wonderful to see so many of you. So, okay, so go ahead and unmute. 3, 2, 1. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful
Love you all.
energy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.